It was the kind of silence that grips a stadium long after the final whistle, not the triumphant hush that follows a hard-earned win. This was something else entirely. The kind of silence that echoes with disbelief, disappointment, and doubt. Liverpool had just fallen to their fourth straight defeat. Anfield, once an unshakable fortress, had become a theater of shattered dreams. The fans stared blankly at the pitch, as though searching for a version of their team that had vanished into thin air. Mo Salah limped off. Virgil van Dijk looked lost. The midfield, once relentless, had become porous. The fire, the pressing, the belief, it was all gone. And deep inside the tunnel, Jurgen Klopp sat alone in his office, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. He had given everything to this club. He had transformed doubters into believers. But now, he didn't even believe in what he was watching. Injuries had ravaged the squad. Momentum had abandoned them. Critics called it a fluke season. Others whispered it was the end of an era. That night, a storm battered Liverpool. Rain lashed against the windows. But it was nothing compared to the storm inside the club. For the first time in years, the team looked not just tired, but lost. And somewhere far from the drama of Anfield, in a quiet rehabilitation room at the AXA Training Center, Diogo Jota watched it all unfold on a flickering TV. He wasn't even supposed to be in that match. A calf tear had kept him sidelined for months. Every kick he couldn't make, every run he couldn't chase, fell like a dagger. The pain of injury was one thing, but the helplessness, watching your team bleed without being able to stop it, that was something else. Jota had arrived at Liverpool like a thunderbolt, a signing many questioned, a forward some didn't rate. But he'd silence them all, scoring, pressing, creating space like a man possessed. His first season was electric. Then came the injuries, the setbacks, the false dawns of recovery. But now, staring at the rain-streaked window, he made a decision. He would come back, not just as a player, but as a spark. The physiotherapy team at Liverpool knew better than to rush things. But Jota's determination changed everything. Every rep was filled with purpose. Every session went over time. He refused days off. His trainers begged him to slow down. But he saw what was happening to the team, and he couldn't. He didn't want to come back as a body on the bench. He wanted to return as the difference maker, as the missing link in a team gasping for breath. Word began to spread. Behind closed doors, whispers grew among staff. Jota looked sharp. His touch is back. He's quicker than before. But Klopp remained cautious. He'd seen too many players rush back, only to fall apart again. Still, something in Jota's eyes told him this wasn't recklessness. This was resolve. Then came the match that changed everything. It was mid-April. Liverpool were away to Arsenal. A loss would mean not just top four hopes fading. It would signal collapse. The match started with disaster. Martinelli tore through the defense. Odegaard toyed with the midfield. At halftime, Liverpool trailed 2-0. In the dressing room, Klopp stood silent. The players stared at the floor. Then the assistant coach leaned in and whispered, "Jota's ready." A long pause. Then Klopp nodded, and a message was sent to the bench. Get Diogo warmed up. As he jogged toward the touchline, the away fans rose to their feet. A ripple of excitement moved through the stands. It wasn't just a return of a player. It was a return of belief. And then, in the 61st minute, it happened. Salah fed the ball wide to Alexander-Arnold. A low whip cross. Jota darted between two defenders like a knife through silk. One touch. Bang. Back of the net. 2-1. He didn't celebrate. Just pointed to the badge and jogged back to the halfway line. The fire was back. 15 minutes later, Liverpool won a free kick at the edge of the box. The usual suspects stood over it. But then, Jota stepped forward. A glance. A breath. A strike. Top corner. 2-2. The away end erupted. But it wasn't over. In the dying seconds, Arsenal pushed for a winner. A misplaced pass, intercepted by Fabinho, who launched it forward. Jota sprinted like a man possessed, outpacing two defenders. Ramsdale rushed out. Jota chipped. Time slowed. The ball arced. It dipped. It landed. Goal. 3-2. Liverpool had come from behind. And the man who did it wasn't Sulla, wasn't Nunez, wasn't Gakpo. It was a quiet Portuguese forward they once called a backup. In the post-match interview, Klopp couldn't stop smiling. We've missed Diogo. But it's not just his goals. It's his heart, his timing. He reads a game like few can. We've been through hell. But tonight, we saw the beginning of something new. And in the locker room, as champagne sprayed and boots thudded against lockers, Jota sat quietly, staring at the match ball beside him. He wasn't done. Liverpool weren't done. This was only the beginning. The rain hadn't let up all morning. By kickoff, Anfield was soaked in a gray drizzle that mirrored the mood of the fans. Liverpool were hosting Wolverhampton Wanderers in what had been branded a must-win game, not by the press, but by Klopp himself behind closed doors. After weeks of underperformance, Klopp's voice no longer carried the confidence it once did. But there was one person who wasn't fazed by the pressure, Diogo Jota. On the team sheet that day, Jota's name surprised many. He wasn't fully fit, still nursing pain from an earlier knock. He had been expected to sit this one out. But when Klopp asked him, "Can you give me 70% today?" Jota had replied simply, "I'll give you 100% of my 70%. The stadium buzzed as the players emerged from the tunnel. The cop tried its best to lift the team with deafening chants, but the atmosphere carried a nervous edge. For the first 20 minutes, Liverpool looked lethargic. Sloppy passes, poor positioning. Even Van Dijk appeared out of rhythm. Then, in the 24th minute, Wolves capitalized. A mistake in midfield led to a break. And before anyone could react, the ball was in the back of Alisson's net. The collective groan that rippled through Anfield was almost physical. Shoulders slumped. Arms went up. A few fans in the front rows buried their faces in scarves. Klopp stood on the touchline, arms crossed tightly. The dream of a Champions League spot was slipping further away. But then, something shifted. "Jota!" He didn't yell. He didn't gesture theatrically. But he began to press. Relentlessly. He chased every loose ball, hounded every Wolves defender, and drew fouls with fearlessness that ignited something in his teammates. Slowly, Liverpool began to find rhythm, passing with intention, moving with energy. By the 38th minute, Jota received the ball just outside the box, shrugged off a defender with a deft turn, and sent a rocket into the top right corner. Anfield erupted. It wasn't just a goal, it was a statement. As Jota ran to the corner flag, fists clenched and roaring to the sky, you could feel the belief return. Cameras caught Klopp's eyes widen, and a grin break across his face for the first time in weeks. Liverpool went into the break at 1-1, but the psychological tide had turned. In the dressing room, the usual tactical talk was interrupted when Jordan Henderson turned to Jota and said, "That goal! That changed everything." There was a collective nod. For once, it didn't matter what formation they used. They had found their heart again. The second half was war. Wolves defended deep, intent on salvaging a point. But Liverpool surged forward with renewed determination. Jota led the line like a man possessed. He wasn't the tallest, the fastest, or even most technically gifted, but he played like someone who refused to lose. In the 73rd minute, he was on the end of a cross from Robertson, a flying header. 2-1. Jota didn't celebrate wildly this time. He simply pointed to the badge on his chest. The camera zoomed in, and you could see the emotion on his face. Not joy, not pride, but resolve. As the final whistle blew, Klopp pulled him into a bear hug. "You've just saved our season," he whispered. But Jota knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, headlines across England sang his praises. Jota the savior, the Portuguese phoenix, from injury to inspiration. Social media exploded with fan-made compilations of his performance. But beneath the excitement, Jota remained grounded. That week, Klopp invited him to his office. He closed the door, handed Jota a cup of coffee, and said, "I don't know if you realize what you've done. The boys look at you differently now. You become our reference point, not just a striker, but the spirit we need." Jota smiled faintly. "I just wanted to win." But Klopp wasn't done. "I need more from you. Not just goals. Leadership. That word hung in the air. Leadership. Jota had never considered himself a leader. He wasn't vocal like Henderson or flamboyant like Sulla, but something had awakened in him during the Wolves game, a sense of responsibility. He had pulled the team from the brink once, and he was ready to do it again. Behind the scenes, his influence began to grow. At training, he stayed late to run drills with the younger players. He quietly encouraged Nunez, who was struggling with confidence. He spoke up in tactical meetings, pointing out weaknesses in upcoming opponents. And every time Liverpool went onto the pitch, he gave everything, pain or not. By mid-April, Liverpool were unbeaten in 5 games. Jota had scored in 4 of them, but it wasn't just the goals, it was his presence. Every time he touched the ball, the fans rose. Every run, every tackle, every flick. He played like a man chasing something more than points. He was chasing redemption, not just for himself, for the whole team. That run of form propelled Liverpool from 8th to 5th. The dream of Champions League football was alive again. The press called it a miracle. Klopp called it something else, the Jota effect. But amidst all the praise, Jota remained quiet. When asked in an interview about performances, he simply said, "I'm doing my job. That's what this club deserves." One fan tweeted, "He doesn't scream. He doesn't beg. He just saves us. Every time." In episode 3, we'll journey into the climax of the season, when a single moment pushed Jota into legend and what he did stunned even his fiercest critics. It was April 14th, 2023, a date that would later echo through Liverpool folklore. Anfield's red walls shimmered under the floodlights as the crowd roared with a nervous kind of hope. Liverpool was locked in a tense Premier League clash with Nottingham Forest, a match that, on paper, should have been routine. But nothing was routine anymore. Every point mattered. Every missed pass carried the weight of the season. Liverpool were still trailing Manchester United and Newcastle in the top 4 race, and time was bleeding out. The atmosphere was electric, yet anxious. The team had been inconsistent all season. Sulla had moments of brilliance. Darwin Nunez was still adjusting. Gakpo was improving. But it was Diogo Jota, the man who had spent nearly a year fighting to return to form, who stood in the center of the pitch like a silent storm brewing. Just days earlier, he had finally broken his goal drought in that 6-1 thumping of Leeds United, but some called it a fluke. Others said he was lucky. The critics, the press, even some of the fan base weren't convinced. They had no idea what was coming. The first 25 minutes of the match were chaotic. Forest had a point to prove. They pressed high, forcing a listen to early saves. Klopp paced nervously at the edge of his technical box, barking instructions. Liverpool needed a spark. The team was flat, moving like a machine that hadn't been oiled in weeks. And then, minute 26. A simple corner from Trent. Chaos in the box. The ball deflected once, twice. And out of nowhere, Jota twisted midair, connected with his chest, and slammed the ball into the net. 1-0. Anfield erupted. The celebration was different. He didn't run to the corner flag. He didn't slide on his knees. Jota simply looked at the sky and closed his eyes. He was quiet, as if he'd made peace with a version of himself the world never knew existed. But the match was far from over. Forest equalized minutes later, sending a shockwave through the Kop. Liverpool was suddenly on the back foot again. The anxiety crept in. Fans looked at each other, some shaking their heads. "Same old," one man muttered. But Jota wasn't done. Minute 55. Liverpool won a free kick just outside the box. The wall was set. Forest looked organized. Trent stepped up, but instead of shooting, he lofted it to the back post. Chaos again. The ball fell. Guess who? Jota. With a striker's instinct, he stabbed it into the net. 2-1. Now the crowd was on fire. Jota pumped his fist, roaring at the fans. Klopp hugged his staff. But still, Forest wouldn't go away. They scored again. 2-2. Tension returned. The hope that had sparked now flickered dangerously close to burnout. Then came the moment that made legends. Minute 70. A quick break. Robertson surged down the left. Sulla dragged 2 defenders with him. Jota peeled away into space. Robertson saw him. The cross was perfect. Jota timed his run like a phantom. He leapt, and with a sublime header, buried it in the far corner. Hat trick, and Field exploded. The stadium shook. Commentators lost their voices. The bench sprinted to the touchline. Jota was mobbed by teammates. For a man who had gone 372 days without scoring, now he couldn't stop. But beyond the roar of the fans, the camera caught a quieter moment. As Jota walked back to the halfway line, Klopp pulled him aside and whispered something in his ear. Jota nodded. There were no smiles, just a deep, emotional understanding between two men who had weathered the storm together. That moment symbolized more than just goals. It represented resilience. It symbolized redemption. The game ended 3-2. Jota had single-handedly dragged Liverpool across the finish line. It wasn't just a win, it was a statement. And the story didn't end there. In the days that followed, pundits began to change their tune. Gary Neville called it one of the most important hat tricks in recent Liverpool history. Jamie Carragher declared, "He's back. That's the Diogo Jota we knew, and maybe one we never really understood until now." Jota wasn't just scoring goals. He was lifting a team. He was carrying a season on his back, even if most couldn't see the burden he bore. The dressing room shifted. The team's mood changed. They trained harder, smiled more. Even Van Dijk, usually stoic, admitted in an interview, "Diogo gave us belief again. And sometimes belief is more dangerous than form." Fans across the globe began sharing their own Jota stories, of watching him through his rehab, of defending him when the stats didn't, of seeing a fighter in a world of doubters. Twitter was flooded with tributes. One post read, "Diogo Jota didn't just save a game. He reminded us what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself." Behind the scenes, something else happened too. After the game, Jota stayed behind at Anfield, hours after the cameras shut off. The stadium was empty, the lights dimmed. A single groundskeeper saw him sitting on the bench, staring at the pitch in silence. Maybe he was reflecting on the past year. Maybe he was remembering the sleepless nights, the surgeries, the doubts. Or maybe he was just grateful, not for the hat trick, but for the chance to be himself again. And for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. May 20th, 2023. Final home game of the season. Liverpool versus Aston Villa. A must-win, a last chance, a curtain call. The top four race had reached its boiling point. Manchester United, Newcastle, and even Brighton were still clawing for Champions League spots. Liverpool had won 7 straight matches, clawing back into contention. They weren't supposed to be here. Not after that mid-season collapse. Not after all the injuries. Not after the chaos. But here they were, one final push away from redemption. Anfield was a sea of flags, hearts pounding in unison. The cop was louder than ever, singing "You'll Never Walk Alone" like it was a war cry. The pressure was enormous. Everyone could feel it. Everyone except Diogo Jota. He walked onto the pitch calm, centered, wearing the number 20 shirt with a quiet defiance. His resurgence had become the season's biggest story. 10 goals in 10 games. Headlines screamed his name. Opposing managers double-marked him. But he never lost focus. Never played for the cameras. He only played for Liverpool. And for every fan who never gave up on him. But the match didn't start the way they hoped. Villa scored first, shockingly, against the run of play. Anfield groaned. Doubts returned. Klopp punched the air in frustration. Sulla missed a chance. Gakpo had a goal disallowed. Time began to tick away. Then came minute 64. Jota picked the ball up near the halfway line. He darted past one defender, then another, sprinting toward the penalty box. The stadium rose with him, breathless. A fake shot, a right foot cut, and just as the third defender lunged in, Jota slipped a pass through to Sulla, who buried it. 1-1. Lifeline. He didn't score, but it was his goal all the same. His vision, his timing, his calm under pressure. Klopp turned and clapped furiously at Jota. You could see the relief on his face. But Liverpool needed a win, not a draw. And the minutes were melting away. Minute 88. A loose ball near the edge of the box. Chaos. Scrambled defenders. A failed clearance. The ball bounced once, twice, then dropped near the 6-yard line. And standing right there was Diogo Jota. The moment froze. Time slowed. He didn't lash it. He didn't panic. He simply cushioned the ball with his left foot, opened his body, and curled it into the top corner with such elegance. It looked rehearsed. 2-1. Anfield detonated. Fans screamed, hugged strangers, cried openly. Klopp dropped to his knees. The bench erupted. Jota ran to the corner flag, this time unable to hold back, arms wide, eyes closed, face to the heavens. It wasn't just a goal. It was a release of everything. The pain, the rehab, the criticism, the doubts, the sleepless nights, the aching muscles, the fear of being forgotten. He had done it, and as the final whistle blew, something rare happened. The entire stadium began chanting his name, rhythmically, loudly, over and over. Diogo Jota! Diogo Jota! Diogo Jota! The man who had once been sidelined, overlooked, questioned, was now being serenaded like a king. After the game, reporters swarmed Klopp. What does Diogo Jota mean to this team? One asked. Klopp didn't hesitate. He didn't just score goals. He rescued our spirit. He brought us back to life. In the dressing room, no champagne, no shouting, just quiet smiles, fatigue, relief, joy. Jota sat with an ice pack on his knee, sipping water, while his teammates patted him on the back. But you could tell he wasn't caught up in the moment. He was already thinking ahead. That was Jota. Later that night, fans lit up social media. Jota saved our season. He's not just a player. He's a warrior. From forgotten to unforgettable. And there, in one post, a fan wrote, "We thought it was over, but then Jota happened." That became the story's tagline. A truth repeated on podcasts, talk shows, even T-shirts. And in Portugal, back in his hometown of Massarelos, old neighbors watched the match in pubs and bars. They raised glasses. They cried too, because they remembered the kid who never boasted, who trained quietly, who wore his backpack and headphones to practice in the rain. A hero was never meant to be the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, he's just the one who never stopped showing up, especially when it's hardest. Liverpool didn't finish top 4, but they came close. They secured Europa League football. More importantly, they found their identity again. And the biggest reason? Diogo Jota. The untold truth wasn't in the stats. It wasn't just in his 14 goals or his clutch performances. It was in the way he lifted the weight no one else could, in the silence he endured, in the fight he never advertised. Weeks later, in a quiet interview, Jota was asked what this comeback meant to him. He smiled and said, "Sometimes the best way to speak is to let your feet do the talking."